Welcome back to Historical Quarrels, everyone. I'm your host, Tyler Eckhart. Today, we will be going over the rest of the story to the legendary liver-eating Jeremiah Johnson, the man who supposedly ate over 300 livers of native Crow tribe members. So, couple of quick things, a couple of quick announcements, and then we'll kind of have a recap of last week's episode a little bit here. First off, I need to go ahead and give a big shout out to everyone that, shared last week's episode, because we have officially hit over 1,000 listeners, at least monthly, which is crazy. I seriously want to thank all of you for sharing the show, for tuning in. It means a ton to me that each of you enjoy listening and have kept coming back each week. I'm so proud of the progress the show has made since its inception, and I will continue to do my best to make the show better and better for each of you. Also, NSFW warning, as always. The show is very NSFW. Don't recommend listening to it in front of kids, grandparents, really anybody besides yourself, you sick fuck. Just kidding. No, well, it is NSFW, but I do recommend sharing with people that have a sense of humor or, don't mind me blabbing on about random shit and saying naughty words. Okay. Also, I have a little surprise that will be coming out on Christmas Day on the 25th, since it's a Monday. I'll be doing an episode like the one that's coming out on that day every year, and it will involve a little guessing game for you guys. Essentially, I'm going to be talking about a quarrel that may or may not have happened, and the first person to email me at historicalquarrels@gmail.com and let me know if it did or didn't happen and tell me what the story is from will win a prize. That prize is TBD currently and will be announced Christmas Day. So I'm hoping this will provide a bit of fun for everyone, and it lets me use my creative chops a little more. I gotta come up with some stories, get to do some, like character writing. A couple of things for the story. Number one, real or not, the proper names of the places and people will be changed. Number two, the story beats will be the same. Like if I were to retell the story of, let's say, Cinderella, I would say there was a peasant girl named Freya in Norway who, with the aid of her grandma, who worked in the king's castle, snuck into a ball and swooned the king's son. And due to her period starting, she rushed out of the ball, leaving behind one of her dumb Norwegian clogging shoes. And because her feet were so big, the prince surmised that he could find her by inspecting every girl in the kingdom's feet. And he totally did that to find her and definitely did not have a fetish and for sure wouldn't pull his cock out and slowly rub it like a magical genie lamp while inspecting the feet. Again, if I haven't already mentioned it, the show is NSFW. Shouldn't be listened to in front of children. So yeah, that episode will do something similar and probably won't be as easy as Cinderella, so prepare yourselves. Again, it could be real as well. I could tell like a totally, real story or like just like a event that happened, but then like change it around, and it won't ever be like a magical place. I'll probably just like put the setting somewhere else, and again, change the names and stuff, and just kind of like, let's say if I was going to retell 9/11, but like if I did that, I would have it happen in Russia, and just be like, yeah, so like these really angry people from Greece hijacked some planes and blew up some towers in Russia or something like that. That's how it would go. Okay, so prepare yourselves. It's gonna be fun. It'll be a fun little game for all of us, for all of you guys. So, and last announcement is big thank you to everyone who reached out to help me learn more about jelking, especially to James from Arizona. I appreciate the help and the video of yourself demonstrating the proper techniques. That was really helpful, and now I know how to jelk properly. Okay, so quick recap from last episode. We went over what mountain men are, how they came to be, and then the early life of Jeremiah Johnson. In his early life, we learned that he may have deserted the Navy, been nearly cheated by some swindling asshole, fought a fucking grizzly bear, tried to help some crazy woman whose family were killed and tortured by some Crow warriors, and then went over his marriage and subsequent death of his native Flathead tribe member wife and unborn child, and then his oath he made to make basically the entire Crow tribe pay. So if you didn't listen to last week's episode, please do. There's a ton of information in there that adds a bunch of context to today's story. So with that out of the way, let's go ahead and dive into the second and final part of today's historical quarrel.
You are listening to Historical Quarrels.
All right. So it was in 1848 that the first news of Johnston's despoiling of the Crows spread through the West. Over vast territory where white men's campfires were few, far from the Absaroka's own lands, and indeed wherever they hunted or traded, Crow warriors' bodies, and only Crow warriors' bodies, were found mutilated in special fashion. Not merely scalped, but cut beneath the ribs, and the livers removed. Delgu, Bearclaw, Chris, and Bigfoot Davis answered what questions were put to them. Johnston, they said, was eating these livers. What Johnston's motives was, they did not say. Few knew even that Johnston had taken the swan to wife. So short had been their time together. The general knowledge of Johnston's motives among the scattered inhabitants of that wilderness resulted only from an anonymous native's accidental spying out of a visit to his bones. Naturally, the vendetta could not remain hidden. Within half a year, Johnston became the Crow Killer, or Dapik Absaroka, or liver-eating Johnson. 49ers, on their way to dig California gold, heard the tales as they passed through the mountain country and carried them to the coast. Mountain men made an epic of the story. Many of them had, when hard enough put, eaten human flesh, but limbs, of course, never inner organs. Because, like when you're eating human body parts, you just gotta ignore the organs. That's just, that it's fine to eat arms, It's not okay to eat intestines. I mean, that's like another level of eating someone's asshole. Like eating the whole asshole. It's not okay. It is weird, though, that like they were totally okay with eating like arms and not organs for some reason. That's funny to me. They didn't want human haggis, apparently. White mothers and far-flung outposts sent idling youngsters scurrying for cover with the admonition, "I'll get liver-eating Johnson after you with this knife." With his knife. And when at long intervals the Crow Killer came in to such outlying outposts as Fort Laramie, the womenfolk of soldiers and settlers closed their shutters and peered through the cracks of the dreaded solitaire, who strode by with scalps dangling from his belt. They shuddered at sight of his great red beard, more crimson yet in their imaginations. Yeah, he was a fucking freak. Redheads are freaks, apparently. It's a bad day to be a redhead. Anyways, this man had become an actual fucking cryptid at this point. It's insane to think that I haven't seen this story repeated over 1,000 fucking times already. I can just picture this tale coming to life, like on screen. So good. I mean, there's the Robert Redford movie, but there's not like a whole lot else. Anyways, continuing on. Johnston came into Fort Laramie in 1851, this year, incidentally, in which Crow lands were bounded by a federal treaty signed at the same fort. And for those unaware, the Fort Laramie Treaty of 1851 was an important agreement between the United States government and representatives of various Native American tribes, including the Sioux, Cheyenne, Arapaho, Crow, Assiniboine, Mandan, Hidatsa, and Arikara nations. This treaty was signed at Fort Laramie in what is now Wyoming. Key aspects of the treaty included territory acknowledgement. The treaty recognized specific territorial boundaries for each tribe, aiming to reduce conflicts among them. Good luck there. This acknowledgement of tribal lands was significant as it represented formal recognition of their territorial rights by the U.S. government. Yeah, and which is good. The U.S. government should have done that, but what good is it going to fucking do? And safe passage for settlers, for another good part of this treaty. The treaty guaranteed safe passage for settlers on the Oregon Trail and other migration routes through the Great Plains. This was essential during a period of westward expansion in the United States. There's also the promises of payments and goods. The U.S. government promised to provide annuities or payments along with goods to the Native American tribes. These payments were intended as compensation for damages caused by the influx of settlers and to maintain peace. There's also the mutual non-aggression part of the pact. The tribes agreed not to attack settlers and allow the construction of government forts and roads within their territories. In exchange, the U.S. government pledged to protect the tribes from attacks by settlers and other tribes. And then the preservation of hunting rights. The treaty allowed the tribes to continue hunting on their traditional grounds. But, treaties are only as good as the people who wrote them. And the people who wrote this treaty, not that great. So despite the treaty's intentions, its terms were savagely and frequently violated, much like my butthole after a night of Taco Bell depravity and reckless abandon. The U.S. government often failed to make the promised payments and protect Native American lands from encroachment by settlers. The discovery of gold and other resources on tribal lands led to increased violations of the treaty, culminating in further conflicts and subsequent treaties that eroded the rights originally recognized in the 1851 agreement. The Fort Laramie Treaty of 1851 is a very significant historical document, however. It symbolized both a moment of recognition of Native American rights and the challenges in upholding these agreements in the face of expanding American settlement and economic interests. Because, we wanted money. And, well, the natives were sitting on that money, and they were just sitting on the money. And, as you kind of look at that, and you're like, so are you going to do anything with the money? And, and when they're not doing anything with it, it's like, well, I want to do something with the money. And then they went and took the money. Even though it was their money too, but they weren't doing anything with it. It's like, no, fuck you. They just knew not to disrupt the land and, pollute everything. Industrialization is great, but man, the damage we have done to this planet, bad. Yeah, so they were like, well, we need the money, and what the fuck are they going to do? Keep fighting us? Which is exactly what the natives did. So people just kept fighting. Anyways, back to the story. Bear Claw, Chris, and Del Goo, I'm just going to call him Goo, saw Johnston there briefly. Bear Claw had not seen his friend Johnston for years. Now he sought him out with a proposition for a trapping trip in the mountains. Johnston said tersely that he had other business and strode away. Del pulled Chris back before he could follow, saying, "Can't you tell? He said he's on a trail." He was hunting a more dangerous game. Far away to the west, even beyond Fort Benton and the headwaters of Missouri, there lay a country wild and primeval. God damn it. That's not, okay. Primeval. Whatever. It's great mountains alive with wild game, okay? The country of the Bitterroot Mountains, here, each spring, came the crows. This was Flathead country now. These fabled hunting grounds of many tribes, these green valleys and tortuous streams beneath the looming peaks that had seen the wars of so many peoples, were not open to crow hunters, except as they came for war on specified business. The crows possessed excellent qualities. They were proud, brave, and stalwart. They were not quarrelsome, like, for example, the Blackfeet, who were continually at war with this or that tribe. The Crow Braves were good family men. Crow counselors listened to the wisdom their women might have, though other tribesmen mocked them for such quote-unquote weakness. The Crows were fine artisans and manufacturers, hence conventional traders rather than thieves and marauders. They were peaceful in that they did not seek wars, but when attacked, they usually routed their attackers, taking more scalps than they lost. Which does make you wonder why the fuck they attacked Johnston's wife, and it does kind of lend this story to being probably a lot of truths mixed with a bunch of lies or exaggerations, or some hidden truths, like Johnston probably went and, fucked a bunch of crows up, and the crows were like, well, your family's going away now. Or something like that, I don't know. Yeah, it's kind of like that one friend. Let's call him Tim, who tells you a story about another friend, and let's call them George, who supposedly did a triple backflip off a 30-foot diving board. But when you ask George, you come to find out that Tim was just super drunk and on shrooms that night. And he kept telling everyone how crazy that flip was, but no one could figure out what the fuck he was talking about. And George got so concerned, they ended up calling Tim's 60-year-old mother to come and pick up her 40-year-old son for doing just one too many drugs. It's like that, just a bunch of these oral stories are just a bunch of potential exaggerations of people being probably high on something. It's also why they are hard to verify, especially with conflicting information like this. But whatever, let's just keep enjoying the story. We're gonna have a good time enjoying the story because the story is it's crazy. It's cool. Nice. Big Robert, a new player into the story. He's a leader of some Crow tribesmen. Well, he's a chief. Had sent 50 of his picked warriors to the Bitter Roots to trade with the Flatheads for horses. Their bulging packs held buffalo robes, necklaces of grizzly bear claws, finely beaded leatherwork, and eagle feathers. The Crows were the best tanners in the West. In exchange, they would seek out the finest horses bred in the mountains, grown sleek in the valleys, in the green valleys. They rode as a cavalcade, with scouts ahead and trailing behind, and vedettes spread out from the column. Behind them, riding his horse, sitting in a crow saddle, his eyes ever scanning the skyline and rocks about him, came liver-eating Johnson. Motherfucker was ready. He was hunting them crows. Somehow he had learned of their plans in advance, and then to trail such a column was mere child's play for him. There was, of course, no intention on his part of attacking 50 seasoned Crow warriors. Even he acknowledged later that to have engaged in such open battle would have been the, quote, foolish thing this guy has ever done. Rather, he bided his time until he could overtake them strategically by night at the forks of the Beaverhead. So here we fucking go, guys. Coming on the hot ashes of their campfire, on the banks of that stream, the trapper dismounted, took 4 horsehide covers from his saddlebags, and drew them over the hoofs of his mount. Leaving the plain trail, he rode flanking it, slowly, carefully, silently. Lest he alert some rearguard scout, his sense of caution paid off. For shortly, a Crow scout did pass on the trail at a gallop. When night came on, Johnson saw a flicker of campfires ahead of him, reflected against a canyon wall, where a tributary flowed into the Beaverhead. Picketing his horse, he climbed the rim rock overlooking the stream. Arid watched while the Crows prepared their evening meal. There, he studied their camp arrangements and made his plans. Slipping back to his horse, Johnson quickly unsaddled, placed the animal on a long tether, ate a portion of cold, jerked buffalo meat, and, crawling into a thicket about 20 yards from his horse, went to sleep with the animal as a sentry. 2 hours before daybreak, he was up and about. Having made sure of his horse, he went back to his former vantage point on the rim rock. Below him, he saw the sleeping camp. 2 Crow sentries were on guard. One was dreamily tending the fitful fires, while the other, a monotonous routine, paced a beat back and forth between the camp and the picketed horses. Highly trained animals. These were loosely held. Some had already jerked their picket pins from the stony ground and had wandered a little apart. Near them, Johnson saw a stack of buffalo robes and other trade goods, behind which he might hide in order to surprise the pacing sentry. Slowly, bringing into play all his skill and experience, Johnson worked his way towards the horses. Once he felt that he had frightened them, he stood silently for some minutes until he saw the culprit, an otter, slide into the water. So, inching forward again, he finally reached the piled goods, and from this base he meant to kill the sentry, scatter the horses, and thus put the 100 warriors afoot. He considered he dare not use his revolver, for he must pull the picket pins before awakening the camp. His bowie, of course, was quick and noiseless, but the sentry might cry out before he could strike deep. Reaching down, choosing from the stones that lay at his feet, he hefted one that was as large as a young pumpkin and awaited the brave's return. The warrior was larger than he had seemed from a distance. Indeed, he was huge and no doubt powerful. He came within a few feet of Johnson's hiding place, glanced at the horses, and turned again toward the camp. He was barely 4 steps away when the liver eater hurled the stone. The missile was unromantic but effective. Caught just beneath his lone eagle feather, the crow fell without a sound except the hiss of his escaping breath. The stone itself was noisier. Quickly, Johnson seized the senseless native crow, lifting and carrying him into the scrub timber at the edge of the ravine. A few seconds later, he was back in the midst of the horses, grunting softly to reassure them as he pulled the picket pins, having freed them all. He scattered the pebbles wide among them, at the same time whooping loudly. As the dreaded yell of the mounted man rang out in the sheltered ravine, the camp of the crows came instantly to life. Their own fierce yells and the shrill of neighing of the stampeding herd mingled, rebounded against the canyon walls. In the chill pre-dawn, they were drowned out by the thundering hooves of horses in a dead run to the northward. Quickly, the subchief shrilled his orders, and a dozen warriors set out after the maddened herd. Back in the scrub timber, the crow killer threw the body of the huge sentry over his shoulder and slipped through the trees. Some half hour later, his horses saddled and ready for the trail, Johnson bent over the unconscious warrior. He seized the greased scalpel, ran the point of his bowie around its base, placed his moccasin foot on the victim's head, and snapped off the scalp. Fuck, that shit's brutal. Every time I'm thinking about like how they did the scalping, it's nuts. Observing the tremor that ran through the brave's body, he swiftly swept his blade across his throat, realizing the guy was fucking alive when he scalped him. Nuts. So, as he pulled a bullhide belt from around the waist of the crow, Johnson saw that a long, dried scalp dangled from it. A scalp with a wealth of long black hair. He imagined for a moment the ambushing of an emigrant wagon train, the crack of gunfire, the whoops of the crows as they closed in after their victory, and the screams of the women. Perhaps this warrior had procured both the scalp and belt together. Surely his carrying of just the one memento instead of hanging it in his teepee marked its acquisition as notable. But a second glance told Johnson that the trophy had not been torn from the head of a white woman. He ran his fingers through the coarse black tresses. As he looked closer, something familiar caught his eye. And in that instant, the clear light of dawn, the liver eater knew exactly that in this, the beginning of his greatest effort against his enemies. He had met and killed the murderer of his wife. Which, like when I first read this, I was like, how in the hell did he, just by chance, run into the quote-unquote killer? Like, which again makes me wonder about the truth of to this tale. Also, yay, he did it. He avenged her. So, maybe he could be done. But nah. Liver eater had grown a taste for crow liver and wanted more. He had a vengeance. He had killed the swan's killer, but more than one crow had a hand in her death. Now, by having set 100 crows afoot, he had gained enough time to alert the Flatheads for their coming. The Flatheads would agree that one scalp might be avenged by any number, and they would welcome a share in such vengeance. That's right, this motherfucker leads a small army for this shit, guys. It's fucking nuts. So he runs over to his previous, I guess still kind of father-in-law's hut, Bear's Head, and tries to go visit him, and he does visit him. So Bear's Head arose from a buffalo robe on which he had been reclining, and placed his right hand on the trapper's left breast. Johnson returned the gesture precisely. Such was Flathead ceremonial for a visiting relative, and the sentry could now report from his post the amazing news that a white man had come to visit his native father-in-law. At last, Bear's Head knocked out the remainder of the tobacco on the dirt floor of the lodge. Now Johnson could broach his business. He spoke in the Flathead tongue. The old chief's eyes flickered. perhaps in surprise at the lingual accomplishment of his son-in-law. He took in his hands the trophies Johnson extended, but at once discarded the fresher of the two. The other he cradled, deftly passing his fingers through the long black strands. The brittle skin crackled under his touch, and a tremor ran through his wrinkled hands. "It's the swan," he said, and Johnson nodded. Many suns have passed. Johnson picked up a handful of sand from the floor and let it trickle through his fingers, kind of indicating time. Yes, a lot of time has passed. So Bear's Head handed the scalp to his son-in-law and picked up the other. He had missed nothing. Had noted that when Johnson entered the lodge, the two had been twined together. And then Bear's Head asked him, "They belong together?" And again, Johnson nodded. The chief's eyes sparkled with hate. They held the question, "Where are the others who came to kill my daughter? Where are the crow's companions? Where are this crow's companions?" So Daddy is ready to do some killing. So he informs him so Johnson informs him where they are and how many there are. And they get some men together to lay the fucking smackdown on these guys. The books and stories don't really recount this event too well, so you'll have to imagine a standard battle scene in your head. I'll give you 3 seconds to do so. Okay, I hope it was epic as fuck. Anyways, during this time, Johnson's fame would increase. Other tribes started making fun of the crows for being hunted down by one guy, and were saying things like, "Open up your shame caves for the whitey, little wee nooks. I bet my auntie could be the next crow killer, you bunch of teepee tom apples." Or something like that. I hope I got some of that res insults right. Let me know if I did good. People who are on reservations, if I got that right. If I didn't, please tell me some better insults that I can say next time. That'd be cool. I'd like to learn more. Anyways, so the crow got pissed and sent a hit squad of 20 warriors to kill Johnson. Bit overkill if you ask me, but I digress. So in the book it says, fortunately, perhaps, John Johnson never told how he destroyed 20 such crow warriors, one by one. And since during the years when he killed the first 17 of them, he still kept himself pretty much alone, fellow mountain men observing his killing of only 2. No doubt the story of all 20 killings would illustrate the full extent of Johnson's craft, and above all, his capacity for estimating others' craft, his readiness for his opponent's every variety of move. But in any such story, the refrain, he snapped off the scalp, he carved under the ribs, he ate the dripping liver, must become not merely monotonous, but intolerably sickening. Liver-eating Johnson likely served his saga best, leaving this chapter of his contemporaries and our imaginations. Only one fact did he provide, that each of the 20 was slain hand to hand. Each, in his last moments, knew himself victim of the crow killer. And so unlike this book, I'm not going to blue ball you all. I'll go ahead and tell you this story, how I like to imagine Jeremiah would have told it. If he was basically Mac from It's Always Sunny, which later on you'll listen to some stories and you'll see why I'm actually doing this comparison, because it kind of does make sense. Okay, so here we go. Okay, dudes, gather around. I'm going to tell you the most kick-ass story you've ever heard. This is the tale of how I, Jeremiah Johnson, the ultimate mountain man, took on 20 crow warriors. It's all about survival, raw power, and my incredible combat skills. So there I am, deep in the Rocky Mountains, right? My beard's grown out like a true wild man. I'm like in peak physical condition because, I'm all about that fitness life. I'm living off the land, just me and Mother Nature, which is like totally badass. Suddenly, I sense danger. These 20 crow warriors, fierce and silent, are closing in on me. They just think they could take me down, but little do they know they're dealing with Vic J. I'm not just a man. I'm a force of nature. I grab my rifle, feeling its power and girth in my hands. The first warrior comes at me, and bam! I take him down with a single shot. But I'm not just a one-trick pony. I've got moves. I'm dodging, weaving, using my cat-like reflexes. My years of karate training are paying off big time. These warriors, they're coming at me from all sides, but I'm like a ninja. I'm ducking behind trees, using terrain to my advantage. It's like I'm part of the forest, man. Every move is calculated. Every step is precise. Then it's hand-to-hand combat time. I'm using my elbows and my fists.
My signature roundhouse kicks. Yeah! I'm a whirlwind of destruction. Each punch I throw is like a hammer of justice. Each kick is like the wrath of God. The battle's intense, dudes. I'm not just fighting these warriors. I'm fighting for my honor, for my survival. It's primal. It's epic. I'm tapping into something deep inside, something powerful. It's like I'm channeling the spirit of the mountain itself. And the mountain is rugged and really hot abs. One by one, the warriors fall. They're tough, but I'm tougher. I'm Big J, the ultimate warrior, the king of the mountain. And when the dust settles, I'm standing there, victorious, a legend in my own time. So that's how it went down. That's how I, Jeremiah Johnston, defeated 20 Crow warriors. It's a story of bravery, skill, pure unadulterated badassery. And let me tell you, it's not just a story. It's a testament to my incredible survival skills and warrior spirit. Yeah! Remember that next time you think about challenging Big Motherfucking J.
So you're welcome. You know, I didn't get that when reading initially. It felt like my action balls were going to fucking burst from being so blue. So, also not entirely inaccurate again from how some of these stories get told. Take the story from later on from Delgu and one of Johnson's friends about a chance encounter he and Johnston had while visiting Jane Morgan, known as Crazy Woman. And this is one of the two that are supposedly slain in front of his friends. So, for several minutes, Del stood, straining to hear some sound of what might be going on. But all that came to him was the sound of munching horses, tethered nearby. At last, he heard a muffled obscenity. Johnson's, he thought. A grunt in another voice. There was, mixed in with these sounds, the thud of a moccasin brought heavily against flesh. Into the faint light still shed by a few smoldering embers, there sailed his rear quarters, highest, a huge Crow warrior. The warrior had no sooner scrambled to his feet than he found himself facing Johnston. Come after him with extraordinary speed, he had time only to lift his tomahawk before he could bring it down. Another mighty kick from Johnston caught him in the groin. Motherfucker kicked him in the dick. Goddamn, it's when it's a fight for death, you know, for your life, I guess. I get it. But anyways, the weapon fell from the Crow warrior's hand. Johnston stepped in and, with what now seemed slow deliberation, buried his bowie in the Crow's chest. In fact, the entire action had taken only a few seconds. Legit, this man reacted and killed the guy in a couple of seconds. Like, holy fuck, he was good at killing, apparently. That's, these stories are kind of nuts. So, from here, Johnston continues on. He kills the final of the 20 warriors that were sent to, you know, the hit squad that was sent after him. And then in the 1860s, this is a bit of a wild time in Johnston's life. Let's start with his story of getting fucking kidnapped by the Blackfoot and then escaping and fighting a bear with a human leg he was eating to survive off of in the winter. Yeah, that sentence I just said is what I'm about to explain in more detail, not just some bit that I came up with to fuck with you all. Sometimes when I was writing this story, I was like, I bet you people think this is another like fake mislead most of the time as I'm explaining things. But no, it's like actually what happened. Story is nuts, y'all. So, while going on a trade route journey that was over 500 miles in length, Johnston would be captured by a young Blackfoot by the name of the Wolf. Which I don't know if that was his actual name, because that doesn't seem like it would have been a Blackfoot name, but whatever. Anyways, at the Wolf's orders, the warriors stripped Johnston of his crow hunting jacket, his colt, and his bowie, but not his flint and steel. Unarmed and naked to the waist, the trapper was driven afoot and steadily beaten with the flats of tomahawks. At the Blackfoot camp, he was bound with thongs and thrown into a teepee. Right, like thongs, like thong, the thong, thong, thong. The thong, 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 the thong, the thong, the thong, the thong, 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 the thong, 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 thong. He was grim, he was angry, and he was contemptuous of this chief who had taken him prisoner. A Crow chief, he thought to himself, would know better than to so humiliate a liver-eating Johnston. He's kind of like, at this point he realized he was a bit of a big deal. A Crow chief would either kill such an enemy at once or set him free. Methodically, I don't know why anybody would set him free. They wouldn't do that. Methodically, Johnston set to tallying the details of his situation. By his own good luck, and further Blackfoot mismanagement, his hands were fettered in front of him. He would have, it appeared, but one guard, and that only a youth. They're a little too confident of who they captured. They're like, this guy's not going to fucking do anything. He's not going to escape. And outside, already, he could hear rising excitement, which could mean but one thing. The Blackfeet were out his whiskey. Johnston was carrying whiskey with him, and, he was going to go trade it, and they were drinking it. And listen, you never touch another man's whiskey unless you want to fucking die. And these guys chose death. Well, at least one of them did. It was clear from the manner in which his guard eyed Johnston. He had never counted Coop. He fingered his long knife lovingly, in an almost desperate desire to be the warrior who might take the scalp of the crow killer. Then he turned on his heel, forced himself away from Johnston. He knew that the wolf would surely have killed him. Surely have him killed should he murder so valuable a prisoner. And each time that he turned, Johnston sank his strong teeth into the rawhide thongs that bound his wrists. Should his guard stare at him too long at a time, Johnston stared back. The Blackfoot managed a truly ferocious glare, and then again turned away, and Johnston worked a few seconds more at his thongs. The late afternoon brought evidence that, despite the increasing din outside, the wolf was firm in his resolution to sell Johnston alive. For an old woman came to him with an earthen bowl of dog or perhaps muskrat soup. Telling this story later, Johnston described a dish that was greasy, thick with hair, but offered such a meal, he made no fastidious complaint. He wolfed it down to maintain his strength. He relaxed too. Johnston could always relax when there was no purpose and effort. Arms across his face, he hunched over his knees as if to sleep. And as he hoped, his guard increasingly looked away from him toward the entrance. Toward the revelry outside, probably jealous of his compatriots getting really fucking drunk on whiskey. And it was probably pretty good whiskey, all things considered. Johnston seemed to be a man of fine taste. He liked having the finest shit, so he probably definitely had the finest whiskey. So Johnston gnawed away at the thongs about his wrists. At last, the warrior's desire and Johnston's were satisfied. The same old woman brought in a pannikin of liquor, then left. And as his guard raised the vessel to swallow, the trapper strained and burst his bonds. The native turned and looked at Johnston derisively, tamped his knife with meaning, then again raised the whiskey to his lips. At that moment, Johnston acted. The young warrior could hardly have known what struck him. First, he was raised from the ground with a kick that must have in itself crippled him for fighting. Then, as somehow, he whirled, knife in hand, the pannikin spinning off the soft wall of the teepee. He took a blow as of a sledgehammer between the eyes. Any cry he might instinctively have made was lost in a splutter of whiskey. What moan he did make as he fell was too slight to be heard outside. Johnston knew he had little time. The old woman might return. There must sometime be a change of guard. Seizing the guard's own knife, Johnston quickly lifted the scalp and tied it to his own belt. Next, he slit the buckskin down from the guard's right leg, felt the flesh, ran the knife's keen edge around the hip, and cut to the bone socket. Seizing the knee with one hand and the ankle with the other, he twisted and snapped the whole leg from the body. All was done so deftly that his victim lived, which is nuts. Johnston stepped quietly into the fast-gathering shadows of the night. For a moment, he contemplated the band of drunken warriors. Then, the bleeding stump over his shoulder, he stole away. The Blackfeet, when they thought to check on the prisoner, would find only the maimed guard, quivering, stunned, totally incapable of speech. Just fucking nuts. He left the guy alive, too. He just ripped away his leg. Man, he just snapped off that leg like a fucking Kit Kat bar. Which, by the way, this holiday season, you too can be like Jeremiah Johnson and can enjoy man meat by signing up for Blue Mountain Aprons and using code HistoricalCorals25 at checkout. you too can enjoy the taste of nearly frozen man jerky, which I personally have become such a huge fan of, thanks to Blue Mountain. Looks like I just got an email from Blue Mountain Apron saying it would open up a huge lawsuit against us, insinuating that we sell human meat, and we would then be, which would then be liable, and we would sue y'all, and it would become a whole sue fuckfest party that the CO is not willing to participate in. He's willing to participate in orgies and watch his wife get fucked by a donkey, but this fuckfest is not worth it. So please return the check mailed to you or the money to us via check ASAP. Shit. Well, never mind on the whole Blue Mountain Apron code. So that's fuck. I have to return all that money. God fucking damn it. Shit. Shit. Sorry about all that. Anyways, after Johnston escapes, he takes his frozen snack leg and runs off, where he eventually finds a cave where he can build a fire and hopefully not get savagely attacked in. One night, in the Great Divide Basin, he was discovered that he still had one weapon after all. He had found a more than ordinarily comfortable cave. By the fire on his rocky floor, he had for once been able quite to thaw out his emaciated body. His feet to the embers, a firm grip on his victuals, he fell into the sleep of exhaustion. So he just fucking passed out, man. But in the night, he awakened, feeling a tug on his arm. He sat up. Framed in the cave's doorway against the glistening snow outside, he saw a large mountain lion pulling the other end of the Blackfoot leg that he had ripped out, trying to drag it outside. And with a roar, the trapper leaped to his feet, tore the leg free, and chased the big cat outside. He was back in the cave soon enough, and again bedding himself down. But now he heard perhaps, a gaunt grizzly. Presumably, the bear had been hibernating in the back recesses of the cave, had been disturbed first by the smoke from Johnston's embers, and had now been angered by the to-do with the cat. The bear advanced on Johnston, and Johnston advanced on the bear. Apparently he said, "I warn't," and he was later to tell Dell, "in no good humor myself." Swinging his frozen foot as a Stone Age man in his club, the crow killer whacked the bear violently across the nose. Now the bear retreated a little, snarling its rage, and Johnston followed up on his advantage. And this is where I'm getting like the whole Mac thing, right? Because he says that he was alternately dodging bear claws, like fucking tucking and weaving through, and smashing with the leg. He persisted only till the grizzly had had enough. With the last chilling roar, the bear turned and trotted not out of the cave, but back into its lair. Johnston left his cave and his hope of a night's sleep and went on. And there's no fucking way he actually did this. Like, he scared off a mountain lion, which those things will jump you if you are alone. They'll just jump you and kill you. And then he supposedly scared off a grizzly bear. Which maybe the mountain lion, right? Mountain lion, you can maybe scare, and also maybe the mountain lion could smell the bear or hear it, and that's why it ran off. But goddamn, even still, the man made a fucking whole ass eating grizzly, like the grizzly that eats whole asses, surrender supposedly. And that shit's wild. That's I'm gonna call cap, as the young children say. And that's cap. Okay. Anyways, he would survive in the wilderness for a bit and make his way to a mountain man rendezvous and get 40 of them to come back with him and kill the wolf and his 69 other tribesmen with him. So that's what he did. And Johnston got all of his legendary equipment back, all the shit that was stolen from him by the wolf, and is ready to solo raid boss level dungeons again. And this time he beheaded his enemy, taking more than the scalp of the wolf, and he took the whole ass head. Because no one humiliates Johnston like that, damn it. After this, Johnston, in 1864, felt that the natives in his area were bent on peace, and Johnston just really wanted to keep on killing. It became more than just a thing of survival for him. It was a hobby. like my hobby of playing Dungeons and Dragons or Magic the Gathering. Only Johnson's desire was to brutally murder people. And that wasn't just some like dark fantasy done in a fantastical setting where you roll dice. It was his day-to-day reality where you actually had to stab and feel a man die in your hands. So, that's cool. On February 24th, 1864, Johnson and a band of young trappers who'd headed east with him joined the Union Army in St. Louis. They were allowed to keep their sidearms, but forced to store their Hawkins and use Spencer rifles instead. The Crow Killer was academically interested enough in a rifle, which would fire more than once, but he was naturally leery of a weapon as dangerous to the man who fired it as to the enemy. When it blew up, the entire string of shells in the magazine, housed in the butt, exploded. In his first engagement, Johnson threw his Spencer away and used a dead adversary's single-shot musket, which he trusted more, because technology would be too crazy, damn it. As a horseman, Johnson was first placed in Company H, 2nd Colorado Cavalry. His special skills, once known, however, he was delegated as a sharpshooter, and apparently won himself, on this new stage, another reputation. But Johnson had no such biographer as Dell beside him now, and what we know of his 19 months in the Army reflects amusingly what he thought worth telling Dell. The trouble he got into over some scalps. In the 3rd and 4th battles of Newtonia, Missouri, after the great raid of Confederate General Sterling Price had been turned back at Mine Creek. The Union armies under General J.A. Blunt overtook their foe near Newtonia. The Confederates had already lost many prisoners. Now they were saved from utter annihilation only by Shelby's command, and all their drummer boys buttholes were a little sore. If you don't know what I'm referencing, just go listen to the Civil War episodes I did. Yeah, you'll get it afterwards. You'll definitely understand why I'm talking about drummer boys. Okay, natives fought on both sides in the bloody series of battles. And sharpshooter John Johnson, also known also as Veterans Administration Record State John Johnston, but the administration records wrote it as Johnson, and that's why we kind of have the mix-up between Johnston and Johnson. He took a vast harvest of Seminole and Cherokee scalps, but while the Seminoles were Confederate soldiers, these Cherokees fought for the Union. Reprimanded sharply, the Crow Killer gave up his booty and longed for his wilderness. When the war finally ended, Johnson thought that he would surely be discharged at once. In fact, he had to wait through so long a summer of inactivity that he almost missed the trapping season as well. Somehow, at last, he was free. His honorable discharge, again, according to VA records, came through on September 23rd, 1865. Johnson headed north toward winter after that. So he would continue on his war path and fought with different tribes, primarily the Sioux tribe for some years. And eventually Johnson would seek peace, and he did so with the Crows, after he discovered they had made a monument for Crazy Woman, or Jane Morgan, if you don't remember. The story of this goes, Johnson had his palms out in the universal sign of peace, even as Gray Bear half drew his tomahawk. The chief let his weapon slide back into his belt. But though Gray Bear could take his hand off his weapon, his face bore the mark of his fear and his hatred for the man who had killed his tribesmen through so many years. He said, "You are the white hunter who long ago took the trail against us." And then he continued saying, "You are the liver eater." And Johnson said, "Right at first whack. But I've come to end all that." Gray Bear waited for the killer's explanation. "Crazy Woman has a monument," Johnson said. "She was buried by crows." And Gray Bear said that White Badger and his braves had built the old woman's cairn. Crow warriors. "Yes, crow warriors," Gray Bear said, "to honor a white woman touched by the Great Spirit. And to scorn the Blackfeet," he added. So warm to his subject, Gray Bear went so far as to invite the old Crow Killer to join his band in an expedition to Big Dry Creek. But this Johnson thought was unwise all around. And Johnson would say, "Too many young bucks with ye. It was young bucks that first sent me on your trail. So saying, he gave his mount a sharp slap and rode through the brush. His back a broad target, were it not that he left behind him a friend. There were exchanges of gifts to be arranged yet with White Badger, the individual Crow chief who had so honored Crazy Woman, but Johnson could count on Gray Bear's passing the world at once, that the Crow Killer desired friendship. In the months ahead, he would even become their brother in arms. For just as such as individualist as liver-eating Johnson has finally joined the forces mustered against the frontier-wide Sioux war bands. So too the Crows, after years of indecision, were finally to choose sides. Both must have sympathized with Sioux anger at the coming of so many settlers and the loss of old hunting grounds. But both finally acted to quell uprisings, bloody but doomed to failure. And it is here that our story begins to draw to a close, but not complete. He actually becomes a sheriff in Colorado for a while, and it's pretty interesting. So let's go ahead and get into that. So before this happens, his father-in-law, Bear Claw, would pass just after a little hunting. I guess like it was a long winter and the guy was old. But anyways, with Bear Claw dead and Mariano, liver-eating Johnson and Delgo were old trappers, though to be sure Johnson is described as having all the vigor of a man in his prime, even in his middle 60s, which is impressive. I hope when I'm in my middle 60s, I'm described as someone who seems to be in their prime still, like my grandpa. My grandpa definitely was like a man who, even in his 60s, I was terrified of as a young kid because I was like, this guy could probably rip open a man with his bare hands. Part of that is because he was a farmer and mechanic, worked on a lot of machinery, and so I'm certain lifting all that like heavy steel just made it like him huge. And I hope I'm like that in my middle 60s. I hope my grandchildren look at me and not necessarily fear me, but they realize I could take someone out for them. That's my goal. Anyways, after their excellent winter's catch, Johnson moved away from old haunts. He stopped long enough at Leadville, Colorado for White-Eye Anderson to report on his doings. His official duties in Colson, Montana, appear in the town's newspapers. Finally, he was to seek Stompin' Room, far northwest in Alberta. So Leadville, far up in the Colorado mountains, won its fame almost overnight as a place where fortunes could be made and lost in a moment's play. Here came Welsh miners and other European immigrants willing to spend their waking hours underground at the sort of labor native-born Americans shunned. Here came gamblers and confident men from the eastern seaboard. Desperados and hired killers roamed the streets day and night, and prostitutes arrived by every stage. The town of depravity, fucking. And back in those days, that was very frowned upon. That's not what good Christian values, Puritan values would look too kindly upon. Nowadays, that's just Vegas. So, highwaymen sold their loot, and ambushers sold their services in the center of town. From such older diggings as Alder Gulch and Deadwood came all manner of swindlers. For in Leadville, they could win their fast buck faster yet. Buckskin leggings and moccasins were reflected now in patent leather shoes. There were honest investors in Leadville, to be sure, and these must be on the lookout for a knife if thrust in the dark. And there were mountain men who had come just to see their diggings. Quiet bearded men in buckskin, disturbed because disturbance had come to their mountains, but competent to look out for themselves. They were, no doubt, mere figures from a vanquished past. But the new breed of outlaws and killers walked carefully around them and avoided exchange with their scalping knives and tomahawks, and Hawkins and Springfields. Yeah, it's probably best not to go kill the people who've been killing for 50 plus years of their lives. That's, a good idea. Wouldn't fuck with them either if I were them. White-Eye Jack and his partner Yankee Judd were in Leadville as foremen in the Great Bull's Eye mine. Judd had protested the move to Leadville even after White-Eye portrayed the usual end of trapper, scalpless, rotting in some lonely gulch, a feast for the buzzards. Finally, Judd had agreed that he would work the mines, but only in the summer. Come winter, he would be off trapping once more. The partners worked for the same shift and roomed together over the saloon of Rowdy Joe Go.
gunman from Newton, Kansas, recommended to them by his friend, the late Wild Bill Hickok. Across the street from them, this August, lived 20 Cheyenne warriors, in town nominally for provisions, but actually for arms and ammunition. Hanging Kettle, their chief, was all opulent and respectability in his tall beaver hat, with 4 eagle feathers protruding. One morning in late August, just off their shift at the mine and cleaning up in their room, White Eye and Judd heard unusual bedlam in the streets. Peeking out their only window, they could see only that the Cheyennes had deserted their camp. Buckling on their gun belts, they raced the streets. Pushing their way through the hard-packed crowd, White Eye and Judd found liver-eating Johnston and, at his feet, 2 burly, but now motionless miners. White Eye knew them as fighters and troublemakers from his own shift. Lavery and Morgan. Johnson stood silhouetted against the buffalo hide teepees of the Cheyennes, gazing steadily at Bill Grainer, the sheriff of Eagle County. Back against the crowd stood Delgu, leaning on his own rifle, and Johnson's with a half grin on his leathern face. Kind of old, looking a little old and weary now, a little less youthful. Grainer was a powerful man known for his mettle. Give or take 10 pounds, he was as big as Johnson. It was said of him that he rarely had to use his Colt's pistol. It was said that he could subdue half a dozen ordinary men with his bare fucking hands. He's a beast of a man. His sheriff's star shone splendidly in the morning sun, and he looked at Johnson full in the face. "We can't have our citizens knocked around like this, stranger," Bill Grainer said quietly. "Then you'd better keep him off of me," Johnson said. "I ain't killed nobody here. Not yet. But them tenderfoots shoved again me. I just knocked their heads together." So I knocked him out a little bit. It's fine. A dozen mountain men in the audience roared approval, but the sheriff thought to tell them that these were not tenderfeet, but miners. "All town pilgrims ain't are tenderfoots," Johnson said. "If'n but tenderfoots shoved again me like that, they'd be dead by now." And then Dell chuckled. White Eye beside him wondered if perhaps he might head off trouble by telling the sheriff who Johnson was, but now an aged and dignified native came through the crowd. Yankee Judd whispered to Dell, "That's Hanging Kettle, the chief." And Johnson half turned to greet the old man. "How are ye, Hanging Kettle?" he asked. The old chief craned his neck to see who had recognized him. He said, "Crow Killer," in his native tongue. Then he said to Bill Grainer, "This is the Killer of Crows. He's the great white chief of the Shoshone. His victims are strewn in all the mountains and the plains. My grandsons, great warriors, were not born when he took the trail of the Crows, and my sons were still but boys." Just kind of like this man had become a fucking mythical legend at this point. And then Grainer would ask, what does this have to do with me? Come on, guys. The old chief stood tall to express his scorn, saying, "Johnson will kill you with one fucking hand." "White law man, you are only a papoose," which he's like, you are like small game to this guy. And for once, Bill Grainer's eyes blazed at a challenge. He turned from the chief who had so disparaged his might, back to the mountain man who knocked town pilgrims about. "So you are liver-eating Johnson," he said. And Johnson agreed that he was. Then, looking at Grainer over with some honest admiration, he said, "You're about the biggest papoose this child ever seed. Are we going to hug?" You gonna give me a hug now? You want to hug a little bit and wrestle? For a moment, the sheriff did want to fight. Then anger left his face, and he put out his hand. He's like, "I don't think we'll hug," he said. "Welcome to Leadville, Johnson." The 2 miners, regaining consciousness, were trying to get on their feet. Johnson wrapped his powerful fingers around the neck of each and raised them, sat them down, down on their feet with the jar the bystanders felt, and like a jar of felt, and sent them running. Then he and the sheriff warmly shook hands. This began a sort of friendship between the two and would eventually lead to this. At the Powder River, the partners turned right to follow its course. After several more days in the saddle, they arrive at Fort Cure. There, our frontiersmen gave Johnson a message that Dell took as another sign of the West's municipal change.
Sheriff Tom Irving of Custer County had appointed Johnston as his deputy at Colson. And this was again due to Grainer, and like after Grainer left, then Tom took over, and then like Tom came to know Johnston through Grainer and was like, hey, you know what? We need another deputy. Let's get Johnston over here. So Dell wanted no part of the railroad town's desperados, though Johnston said that what Grainer could do at Leadville with 2 hands, he could do at Colson with only 1. And so rest up for further adventures. Johnston was a popular deputy with just one element in Custer County, the ordinary citizen who wanted peace. The hardened desperados left town when he moved in, and the sheriff objected that Johnston made too few arrests, and so took in too few fees. Wasn't making enough money, damn it. Irving came all the way from Miles City to investigate. Overtaking Johnston on his rounds, he asked him about roughing up the roughing up of various prisoners, which had come to his ears, and their later release. Johnston explained lightly, shucks, Tom. Them wasn't bad uns, just liquored up. Alas, takes their 2 one step and bumps their heads together. That settles it. I can keep the peace among these here pilgrims. Keeps calling everyone pilgrims. Irving told Johnston that all lawbreakers must be arrested and sent to Miles City. But Johnston held to his own ways. He didn't want to make their country stand a feed bill on ornery pilgrims. The sheriff recognized defeat, recognized that as long as he had Johnston as deputy, he would have Johnston's banner of law enforcement, and took the next stage back home, the next stagecoach. And it's kind of weird how Johnston really understood how taxes worked, and sometimes people didn't need to go to prison, just get taught a tough-ass lesson, and how, maybe the community didn't need to pay for people who got a little too drunk or were doing drugs or something. Weird. Some guy understood that way back then, and weird how it's a mountain man who understood that. Johnston did a good job, then, by his own lights, and good enough job by Tom Irving so that he was left in office. But Johnston longed for his wilderness. Old cronies visited him eventually to urge him back among them, and old Wind River Jake came in with a specific invitation. Yeah, so like after Tom left office, it was Johnston, and then, Johnston was in there. And he was getting tired of it. He's like, I want to go back out to trapping. That's where I belong. I belong with the other grizzly bears. That Johnston was. Johnston was basically just a fucking grizzly bear. So Jake reined in where Johnston was standing, and despite his age, he sprang nimbly from his horse. I'm clean up from there, Platt, liver eaten, he cried. I have brought ye news from Dale. Johnston embraced the old man in his bear's grip. Here ye are, Jake, looking younger than ye wore when we pulled the wool, for ye remember? And indeed they could have reminisced, but it was plans for the winter ahead that Jake had come to discuss. Arkansas, Pete was on Milk River, across into Canada, Jake said, getting set for a winter's trapping. Now Jake came to the point. Pete was building not for himself alone, but for 2. And Pete says, for ye to get on out in here, says ye are a mountaining man, not a tenderfoot. He says, you're to meet him on the Milk River. Basically being like, listen, we know you don't belong here. Get the fuck out of here. Stop doing this. This is weird. Get back to your old ways. So Jake had begun the delivery of his message in the shade of the feed store where he first met Johnston. He pursued its importance in Johnston's shack of an office behind the store. Scanning the faces of wanted men on Johnston's posters, he brought out another argument. Them's all took care of. Basically, Johnston had already taken care of all the wanted people. So, and then Johnston would ask him, is Della going along, Jake? Jake replied, not unless Johnston would, Jake said. And he said, he wouldn't. I'm going back there to their Platte. They puffed in their pipes for a spell. All took care of, Jake said once again. They don't need no officer here. The next day, Jake started back for the Platte, shrewdly confident that when Dell reached Arkansas, Pete's place in Milk River Country, he would find Johnston already there. And Johnston did, in fact, send in his resignation and would meet him. They would go on one last trapping adventure together, and that would be it for him. So by the year 1900,
Jeremiah Johnson, a figure by then shrouded in the lore of the American West, had reached the twilight of his life. Reflecting a shift from his adventurous past, he retired to a veteran's home in California. This move was a significant change for a man who had spent the majority of his life in the wilderness, living off the land and navigating the harsh realities of the frontier. Johnson's stay at the veteran's home in California represented a period of quietude and reflection, far removed from his days as a mountain man. It was a time for him to look back on his life that had become legendary. A life filled with adventure, survival, and the kind of experiences that most could only imagine. Living in the veteran's home also placed him in a community of others who had served their country, offering a sense of camaraderie in his final days. Maybe even a few more bouts or two here and there. He'd probably beat up a couple people in his retirement home. Just knowing who Johnson was, he was fighting everything. He liked to fight. He was a fighter. But his death on January 21st, 1900, in Santa Monica marked the end of an era. Jeremiah Johnson's passing was not just the loss of a man, but the closing chapter of a period in American history characterized by exploration, the fur trade, and the wild frontier. His life, a blend of fact and myth, had become emblematic of the spirit of the American West, a symbol of rugged individualism and adventure. The legacy of Jeremiah Johnson is one that lives on in the annals of American folklore. His story, embellished and passed down through generations, captures the imagination and speaks to a time and place in American history that has long since faded. He remains a figure of fascination, representing both the reality and the myth of the American mountain man. His death in Santa Monica closed the final chapter of his remarkable journey, leaving behind a legend that continues to inspire and captivate us to this day. And thus ends today's historical forum.
We did it, guys. We got through that whole ass story. It was a long one. Today's episode was a little shorter than last week's. And to be honest, I probably could have put them both together last week, but I figured this would be, fun as like a two-parter, like a good little two-parter here. My takes on all of this is, number one, I'm positive most of that story is fake. Like, goddamn, there's no fucking way. Before he became a fucking mountain man, he stepped in front of a charging grizzly, ducked underneath its claws, like fucking Mac, dodging, punching people in his imagination, and then stabbing it. Like, there's no way at all. Shit's nuts. There's no way that he ripped off a fucking leg and then beat off a mountain lion and then beat back a grizzly bear from its cave back to go to sleep. My God, some of those stories. Did he potentially kill a bunch of Native American people? Probably. He probably actually was married to a Flathead tribe woman and maybe even made friends with them. He was definitely a racist. All of them were back then, but not any more racist than most other people. Most of the white people, I should say. Well, actually, a lot of people back then, too. It wasn't just white people who were racist. There were a lot of people who were racist back then. Yeah, I don't know. It was an interesting story. It was fascinating. It was a lot of fun. I liked all the fucking weird ass eldritch speech, old English, like the old way to spell out words, or at least the fucking Old West way to spell words, like hyar with a HYAR. All that stuff was fun. I like the I don't know, just kind of like the allure of his life overall was interesting. It was a fascinating subject. I had a lot of fun with it. Let me know what you guys thought. What did you guys think about the story? Do you think it's just like a full of horse shit? Do you think that there is more truth than not to it? Do you think there's less truth than there is? Let me know. I'm interested to hear what you guys think. You can do that by reaching out to me through email at historicalquarrels@gmail.com or through our social pages on Instagram, Facebook. I mostly just check Instagram, to be honest. So if you reach out to me on Instagram, I'll probably reply to you faster. Or email, you will get a response pretty quick. So once again, big thank you to everyone who liked and shared the show. If you found enjoyment or felt like the show was worth your time for you, please leave a review. Please share it with someone. The faster we can get up to, like a couple hundred 5-star reviews on Apple or on Spotify, the faster this show can grow and the more time I can put into focusing on it for you guys. Also, another announcement, I am actually currently working on a board game that hopefully will be coming out relatively soon. Well, the Kickstarter might be happening sooner rather than later. Hopefully like sometime in February. I'll give a big announcement for that. So if you like chess and if you like Magic the Gathering, it's going to have some very similar mechanics on how it works. So that will be interesting to share with y'all for sure. But yeah, that's kind of all. I mean, next week we'll be doing another kind of like ancient serial killer. Then the following week we'll probably be doing like a more modern quarrel. I don't know. I was thinking about doing like the shoe brand one between Adidas and Puma, or whatever the German shoe brother makers are. And then we'll probably do another war, like a Roman war or something. And then we'll have our little challenge for the end of the year. So get ready for that. It's going to be fun. Eventually, I'll set up a voting system so people can vote topics in or something. I don't know. That way y'all can, kind of let me know what you like to hear, what you want to hear. That's all. You guys have a good one. Spread the quarrels, spread the chaos. Love y'all. Bye.